Hello folks, today we're going to talk about 3 differences that help us to define between a sociopath and a psychopath, and then I'm going to tell you why I personally don't use these terms. One of the first things that people will say helps you to know whether you're dealing with a sociopath or a psychopath will be their quality of life, their lifestyle. They will say a sociopath is more erratic, is less organized. They have less of an ability to function in the adult world. Psychopaths can hold down a job, can make money, and appear pretty successful. A sociopath will lack the ability to do that. They'll be in between jobs all the time, might be living inside of their car or living in sleeping on a friend's couch, more of a sort of a vagabond, moreless lifestyle you'll find with a sociopath. The second thing that they will say defines the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath is that a sociopath has a conscience and they have moral boundaries, but their conscience is weak and their moral boundaries are malleable, whereas they will say a psychopath has no conscience and no moral boundaries to speak of whatsoever. The third thing that they will cite as being the difference between sociopaths and psychopaths is that sociopaths can form meaningful attachments with other human beings, but a psychopath cannot form meaningful attachments with other human beings. Let me give you a little bit of a history lesson as far as psychology goes. There's an old argument that's been playing out in psychology for probably is now just over a century, where they ask, is the personality formed by your nature or by nurture? Are you born with your personality? Are you born a psychopath? Is there a psychopathic gene? Is there a narcissism gene, an introvert gene? Or do you learn that? Is that in response to the environment, in response to trauma? Do you learn to act in this way? And you have these different camps. Some people say, no, it's all genetics. Some people say, no, it's all environment. And the truth, in the age of epigenetics, which is not a particularly old discipline, it's still a new discipline, I think we all have to admit with this one, as far as the science goes, it has to be a mix of both, because in epigenetics we know that the environmental pressures can cause the combination and expression of different genes to take place. So it's neither and it's actually both. Where does the sociopath-psychopath argument creep into this? The idea was that, well, the original psychopaths, if I want to give you a fuller history lesson, the original psychopaths would be anybody who was a moral degenerate. And I'm talking, now we're going back to the old asylums of like 1820, 1830. So a woman comes to the asylum, she's what they would class as addicted to gin. She has multiple illegitimate children from multiple men that she cannot take care of, and she's prostituting herself in the streets of London. They would say this woman is a psychopath. Psyche means soul or mind, and the pathology is pain or illness. So this is a mentally ill person. So in that view, because they're coming from a very religious context, all mental illness is a kind of moral degeneracy and a kind of moral weakness that's taking place. And so psychopathy was criminality, the unwillingness to go to church, the unwillingness to worship God, the unwillingness to pray, and the unwillingness to live a good and normal life. That would make you a psychopath. We move forward in time, people become more socially aware and a little bit kinder. Psychologization seeps out into the environment, and some well-meaning people decided to try and form a boundary between psychopathy and sociopathy. One was psychopaths are born, and so that's, you're born with that in your psyche, in your soul. Psyche means soul or mind. So psychologists, we say we study the mind. Actually, the original meaning of psyche is soul. The sociopaths were created sociologically. They were created through culture. So that's a response to trauma. So the idea still persists, as you can see in the modern definitions. The psychopath is worse. They were born that way. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. The sociopath, it's not so bad because it's a response to trauma. They've learned how to do it over time. So what do we have now today? If you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, as it's delivered by the American Psychiatric Association, these terms, after years of arguing back and forth internally, and then what was starting to happen was that doctors and people who are not psychologists or psychiatrists started to use them interchangeably. So they would call a psychopath a sociopath and a sociopath a psychopath. It got very confusing. So they said, okay, stop. All of this is antisocial behavior, so we'll call it antisocial personality disorder. which is a definition that obviously is very misleading, because that sounds like a person who's schizoid. That sounds like a person who just doesn't want to be around anybody. If you say, I have antisocial personality disorder to anyone on the street, they'll think you don't want to hang around with people. This is the way it goes. It's psychology, inside of psychology and psychiatry, it's a lot of very, very academic people, and they're trying to come up with models that are functioning. They're not trying to make it easier to understand necessarily. So sociopathy and psychopathy, technically speaking, are out of date terms. They're not the up-to-date term. The up-to-date term is ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, because if you put that person as an element into any social environment, they'll find a way to create chaos. They're not good with people. There are different types of psychopathy, different types of sociopathy. I acknowledge that. They're all interesting. They're all good models. I don't deny that those models are worthwhile. But generally speaking, you're probably better off just using ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. One final part of the history lesson on psychopathy. When you're looking at a psychopath and you want to know if somebody's ASPD or not, remember ASPD grew historically from psychopathy. Most of the literature that we have on psychopathy in the world, in India, in Germany, in Africa, everywhere, comes from America. So I would claim sociologically, the notion that we have today of a psychopath is an American artifact. So it's kind of culture bound. So be aware of that. Historically, where did it come from? It came from studying the American penal system. So if you want to know if somebody would clinically get the diagnosis of a psychopath, you would have to try and figure out, do they match the archetype of the average American prisoner? Do they break the law? Do they flout laws and get caught? Because if they flout laws and don't get caught, you may well be looking at a narcissist. If they flout the law and get caught, that means they're a little bit more reckless. That means they lack impulse control, right? So then you're probably more likely to get that ASPD diagnosis. Look, there's no hard physical reality to any of this stuff. It's just words. They're models that we're using to try to make sense of chaos. To try and make sense of, if you go back to the very old way of looking at it, fundamentally, immorality. That's where it started. The notion of the psychopath was a person who was morally handicapped, morally incapable, morally they didn't have the moral fiber to live life as a normal human being. Now, you may think that that sounds outmoded. I actually think that's a pretty good definition. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed that video. Thank you for your time and your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again on the next video. Hello folks, just to let you know, we now have a new course out. It's finally finished. It's called Unplug from the Matrix of Narcissistic Abuse, and it's available from richardgrannon.com. Just hit this link right here and you can go get it.